AWANI tonight, I'm Saraya Mia. Subsidies up to 30 billion from 4 billion ringgit this year. And PT3 abolishment a good call or too hasty? That's coming up. Government subsidies are expected to increase to 30 billion ringgit this year, compared to the 4 billion ringgit allocated under the budget for 2022, as a result of the rise in prices globally. In its pre-budget statement, the Finance Ministry said increase in revenue from commodity-related taxes was insufficient to finance the rise in subsidies. The government is currently planning to enhance subsidies through a more targeted approach. This is to enhance spending efficiency and minimize leakages while ensuring subsidies reach target groups and achieve intended objectives. Focus will also be given on facilitating employment, re-employment, and social protection, especially among the self-employed and informal sector workers. The government approved about 200,000 applications to hire foreign workers for vacancies in sectors that are unpopular among the domestic workforce. Human Resources Minister Datuk Seri M. Saravanan said it was out of 500,000 applications received.
Setakat ni jumlah permohonan yang kita telah terima adalah lebih kurang 200,000. Daripada itu kita sedang mengkaji mengikut keperluan. Dan negara Bangladesh adalah negara terakhir di kalangan 14 negara sumber yang telah bersetuju untuk menghantar pekerja untuk bekerja di negara kita di sektor-sektor yang tidak diminati oleh warga tempatan. Yang pertama. Yang kedua, sektor-sektor ini telah pun diiklankan di bawah My Future Job hampir setahun.
The minister warned that the government would cancel the quotas given to employers who cut their foreign workers' salaries in order to bear the cost of bringing them into Malaysia.
As far as Malaysia is concerned, mana-mana majikan yang mengambil pekerja asing di mana-mana negara, tak kira sama ada Bangladesh atau mana-mana negara, please tanggung kos penerbangan dan sebagainya. Jangan mula-mula tanggung lepas tu potong daripada gaji pekerja. Hari ini kita dah ada aplikasi baru untuk pekerja terus boleh menghubungi pihak kementerian. The moment there's a complaint, majikan lepas bayar deduct salary dan sebagainya, kita akan tamatkan pekerja asing.
In other news, the Cabinet has agreed in principle to 3 proposals for parliamentary reforms. De facto Law Minister Datuk Seri Dr. Wan Junaidi Tuanku Jaafar said the reforms are among areas listed in the MOU signed with Pakatan Harapan last September.
Their proposals include amendments to the Parliament Privileges and Powers Act 1952. This would involve suspending or barring MPs who have been charged in court. The other reforms are a draft code of ethics for lawmakers and enacting a Parliamentary Services Act, which could see the establishment of the Parliamentary Services Commission. Wan Junaidi said the Commission would have autonomous power to determine its own policies and administrative management of Parliament. Following the Cabinet's decision, he has requested for speakers of both houses to meet with stakeholders and hold select committee meetings.
Meanwhile, a former ambassador to Indonesia and his son, arrested for allegedly cultivating 100 marijuana trees around their home in Janda Baik, have been charged. 78-year-old Dato' Zainal Abidin alias and his son, Muhammad Rizal Zainal Abidin, 53, were charged at the Magistrates Court in Bentong Pahang this morning. The father and son were both charged under Section 39B1A of the Dangerous Drugs Act with trafficking and Section 91B with keeping cannabis oil. Rizal also claimed trial to an additional charge under Section 15 of the Act for using THC, the active component of marijuana. Both of them pleaded not guilty to the charge of keeping cannabis oil. No plea was recorded for Section 39B, which is punishable by a mandatory death penalty upon conviction. The duo were arrested for allegedly planting and possessing nearly 100 cannabis trees at their residence in Janda Baik. The police also found dried ganja leaves and containers with liquid inside, believed to be cannabis oil. The next case management is slated for June 13. The Ministry of Education's decision to abolish the PT3 examination starting this year came as a surprise to many. Datuk Satina Said Saleh of the Malaysian Association for Education says more discussions should be held with stakeholders before scrapping the exam.
Decision of examination or no examination, assessment or not assessment, it's not the decision of the Ministry of Education. It's a decision of, actually, a decision should be done by all stakeholders, whether they are parents, teachers, even unions, people like my association. My association is Malaysian Association for Education. We have never been called. We are one of the oldest associations looking at education per se, hardcore, you know. So I'm a little bit apprehensive whether what they call this engagement, syndication was done in the first place. So that you know, you can evaluate, are these the things that the parents would want, the system would want, or are these the favor that the decision that is made only by the ministry alone? Then if it is done by the ministry alone, it is a wrong decision to me.
She agreed to a school-based assessment in assessing students to replace the PT3 exam, but urged empowerment of teachers as well as preparing parents and students to ensure they do not lose out more on learning.
My concern is that the readiness, their psychological acceptance to this, and then being able to assess them with the big number of students in the classroom. You know, if you assess the student based on the same blanket system, you can't do it. But I know school-based assessment is an amazing decision to do if all these things are put in place. And then again, Saraya, the assessment system already changed. If the Ministry of Education are still using the same module, the same way of assessing students, they are totally, I think, far behind time.
Uncertainty over Datuk Zuraida Kamaruddin's ministership has brought into sharp focus Bersatu's precarious position in Malaysian politics. Tonight, we ask our guests if Bersatu remains a serious contender ahead of GE15. That's coming up right after AWANI Tonight. More after the break. Stay with us.
Melindungi anda dan seisi keluarga dalam ruang tertutup. Panasonic.
COVID-19 memperlihatkan kepada kita betapa pantasnya adaptasi teknologi di kalangan PKS kita. Niaga AWANI dan Unified Business akan menyelami perjalanan kebangkitan semula PKS kita melalui segmen Jiwa SME setiap Selasa dan Khamis untuk inspirasi anda.
Transformasikan perniagaan dengan Unified Business, rakan digital pilihan anda. Hubungi kami sekarang dan jimat sehingga 50%. Jom Unified Business.
Welcome back. Celebrated on June 5th annually, the World Environment Day calls for urgent changes in policies and choices so that future generations won't have to live a life without nature. We speak to musician Elena Marang of the Orang Ulu tribe of Borneo to discuss the relationship between the land and the people.
I feel sad about that thought of future generations not knowing the beauty of the forest and the natural resources here in Malaysia, because I know for one that it has really enriched me and it has taught me so many good values, nature itself, the forest itself. And I feel that if we have a generation that does not know that, then who are we as Malaysians, who are we as Southeast Asians, who are we as Dayak people, as Borneans? I truly believe that our identity is very closely linked to the environment, whether it's living by the sea, by the rivers, at some point, maybe even just back to our grandparents' generation, we all lived very closely with nature.
Elena believes through music, she is not only able to keep tradition alive, but also to educate the public about the importance of conserving the environment for future generations.
When I think about my ancestors, the ones that created these instruments and the songs, they did not know any concrete, they didn't know money, they didn't know high-rise buildings. They really, at that time, only knew the natural environment, the world's oldest rainforest, the clear rivers. And as artists and creators, we are always influenced and inspired by our immediate environment. So if we look at the traditional songs, they are 100% born out of nature. They sing of rivers, they sing about the moon, they sing about the stars, and they sing about the soil. And even today, when I write new songs, they always have metaphors of like the sounds of thunder, the wind that carries a song, and even the instrument itself. It's made from wood, it's made from a tree. The strings used to be made from rattan. We stick on the frets with beeswax still. And so all these things have kept me very, very close to nature, and I try to always tell these stories to the audience.
Over in the U.S., a man shot 2 women in the parking lot of a church in Iowa last night before turning the gun on himself. Police arrived on scene to find all 3 dead, adding to the death toll in a series of shootings across the country in recent weeks. The incident took place outside Cornerstone Church in Ames, with a church program ongoing inside. While authorities could not disclose the relationship between those involved, they said it appeared to be an isolated single-shooter incident. The shooting occurred shortly after U.S. President Joe Biden delivered an address on gun violence. This is in the wake of recent mass shootings in New York, Texas, and Oklahoma. Joe Biden once again pleaded with lawmakers to take action on gun violence plaguing the country. He called for a ban on assault weapons, such as those used in recent massacres. Speaking from the White House, the U.S. President pressed for Republicans in the Senate to allow laws for gun control measures to come up for a vote.
Over the last 2 decades, more school-age children have died from guns than on-duty police officers and active-duty military combined. Think about that. More kids than on-duty cops killed by guns. More kids than soldiers killed by guns. For God's sake, how much more carnage are we willing to accept? How many more innocent American lives must be taken before we say enough, enough?
At a minimum, Biden said lawmakers should raise the age at which assault weapons can be purchased from 18 to 21 and strengthen background checks.
I've been in this fight for a long time. I know how hard it is, but I'll never give up. And if Congress fails, I believe this time a majority of the American people won't give up either. I believe the majority of you will act to turn your outrage into making this issue central to your vote. Enough, enough, enough.
In other news, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has entered the 100th day with no end in sight to the fighting. Thousands have been killed and millions uprooted. After it failed to capture the capital, Kiev, Russia has scaled back its war objectives, shifting to efforts to the eastern Donbas region and the southern parts of Ukraine instead.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Russian troops now control about 20% of Ukrainian territory. The country's civilian death toll has surpassed 4,000 according to estimates from the United Nations. But local authorities warned actual figures are likely much higher. Over 6.5 million people have fled Ukraine since the war began on February 24th. Meanwhile, NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg warned Western nations to prepare for the long haul as the battle has turned into a war of attrition. According to UK military intelligence, Russia is now achieving tactical success in the eastern Donbas region, but at a huge cost. Western sources believe 15,000 Russian soldiers have been killed so far. The Kremlin has continued to warn that sending Western weapons to Ukraine will prolong the war.
That's all on AWANI tonight. My name is Saraya Mia. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next week.